The French are a nation and ethnic group who are identified with the country of France. This connection may be legal, historical, or cultural, descending from peoples of Celtic origin, later mixing with Romance and Germanic origin, and having experienced a high rate of inward migration since the middle of the 19th century. Modern French society can be considered a melting pot. France was still a patchwork of local customs and regional differences in the late 19th century. And besides the common speaking of the French language, the definition of some unified French culture is a complex issue. Some French have equated their nationality with citizenship, regardless of ethnicity or country of residence. Successive waves of immigrants during the 19th and 20th centuries were rapidly assimilated into French culture, seeing itself as an inclusive nation with universal values. France has always valued and strongly advocated assimilation, where immigrants were expected to adhere to French traditional values and cultural norms. However, despite the success of such assimilation, the French government abandoned it in the mid-1980s, encouraging immigrants to retain the distinctive cultures and traditions and requiring from them a mere integration. This integrationist policy has recently been called into question. For example, following the 2005 French riots in some troubled and impoverished immigrant suburbs, most French people speak the French language as their mother tongue, but certain languages like Norman, Occitan, Corsican, Basque, French, Flemish and Breton remain spoken in certain regions. In addition to mainland France, French people and people of French descent can be found internationally, in overseas departments and territories of France such as the French West Indies, and in foreign countries with significant French-speaking population groups or not, such as Switzerland, the United States, Canada, Argentina, Brazil or Uruguay, and some of them have a French cultural identity, citizenship and legal residence. To be French, according to the first article of the French Constitution, is to be a citizen of France, regardless of one's origin, race, or religion. According to its principles, France has devoted itself to the destiny of a proposition nation, a generic territory where people are bounded only by the French language and the assumed willingness to live together, as defined by Ernest Renan's Plébiscite de tous les jours. The debate concerning the integration of this view with the principles underlying the European community remains open. A large number of foreigners have traditionally been permitted to live in France and succeeded in doing so. Indeed, the country has long valued its openness, tolerance and the quality of services available. Application for French citizenship is often interpreted as a renunciation of previous state allegiance unless a dual citizenship agreement exists between the two countries. The European treaties have formally permitted movement and European citizens enjoy formal rights to employment in the state sector. Seeing itself as an inclusive nation with universal values, France has always valued and strongly advocated assimilation. However, the success of such assimilation has recently been called into question. There is increasing dissatisfaction with, and within, growing ethno-cultural enclaves. The 2005 French riots in some troubled and impoverished suburbs were an example of such tensions. However, they should not be interpreted as ethnic conflicts but as social conflicts born out of socio-economic problems endangering proper integration. History. French people are the descendants of pre-Indo-European people that lived in western France, which corresponds today to Pays de la Loire and Poitou-Charentes, as well as Gauls and Belgae. Western European Celtic peoples, as well as Bretons, Aquitanians, Iranic Alans and to a lesser extent, Ligurians, mixed with the Germanic people arriving at the beginning of the Frankish Empire such as the Franks, the Visigoths, the Suebi, the Saxons, the Alemanni and the Burgundians, and later Germanic tribes such as the Vikings, who settled in Normandy in the 9th century. The name France etymologically derives from the word Francia, the territory of the Franks. The The Franks were a Germanic tribe that overran Roman Gaul at the end of the Roman Empire. Celtic and Roman Gaul in the pre-Roman era. All of Gaul was inhabited by a variety of peoples who were known collectively as the Gaulish tribes. Their ancestors were Celts who came from Central Europe in the 7th century BCE, and dominated native peoples which can't be clearly identified except the Ligures, the Iberians at the eastern bottom of the Pyrenees, and Aquitanic people in Aquitaine. Some, particularly in the northern and eastern areas, had Germanic admixture. Many of these peoples had already spoken Celtic by the time of the Roman conquest, but others seem to have spoken a Celto-Germanic Creole. Gaul was militarily conquered in 58-51 BCE by the Roman legions under the command of General Julius Caesar. The area then became part of the Roman Empire. Over the next 5 centuries the two cultures intermingled, creating a hybridized Gallo-Roman culture. After an intense Latinization, the Gaulish language came to be called Vulgar Latin, which would later split into dialects that would develop into the French language. Today, the last redoubt of Celtic culture and language in France can be found in the northwestern region of Brittany. Although this is not the result of a survival of Gaulish language but of a 5th century AD migration of Brythonic-speaking Celts from Britain. Frankish kingdom. With the decline of the Roman Empire in Western Europe, a federation of Germanic peoples entered the picture. The Franks, from which the word French derives. The Franks were Germanic pagans who began to settle in northern Gaul as Lati, already during the Roman era. They continued to filter across the Rhine River from present-day Netherlands and Germany between the 3rd to the 7th century. At the beginning, they served in the Roman army and reached high commands. Their language is still spoken as a kind of Dutch in northern France and Frankish in German-speaking Lorraine. Another Germanic people immigrated massively to Alsace, the Alamans, which explains the Alemannic German spoken there. They were competitors of the Franks. That's why it became the word for German in French, Allemand. By the early 6th century the Franks, led by the Merovingian king Clovis I and his sons, had consolidated their hold on much of modern-day France, the country to which they gave their name. The other major Germanic people to arrive in France were the Norsemen or Northmen, Viking raiders from modern Denmark and Norway, who settled with Anglo-Scandinavians and Anglo-Saxons from the Danelaw in the northern region known today as Normandy but also in western France in the 9th and 10th century. The Vikings eventually intermarried with the local people, converting to Christianity in the process. It was the Normans who, 2 centuries later, would go on to conquer England. Eventually, though, the independent Duchy of Normandy was incorporated back into the French kingdom in the Middle Ages. In the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, founded in 1099, at most 120,000 Franks ruled over 350,000 Muslims, Jews, and native Eastern Christians. Kingdom of France. In the roughly 900 years after the Norman invasions, France had a fairly settled population. Unlike elsewhere in Europe, France experienced relatively low levels of emigration to the Americas, with the exception of the Huguenots. However, significant emigration of mainly Roman Catholic French populations led to the settlement of the province of Acadia, Canada and Louisiana, all French possessions, as well as colonies in the West Indies, Mascarene Islands and Africa. On 30 December 1687 a community of French Huguenots settled in South Africa. Most of these originally settled in the Cape Colony, but have since been quickly absorbed into the Afrikaner population. After Champlain's founding of Quebec City in 1608, it became the capital of New France. Encouraging settlement was difficult, and while some immigration did occur, by 1763 New France only had a population of some 65,000. From 1713 to 1787, 30,000 colonists immigrated from France to the Saint-Domingue. In 1805, when the French were forced out of Saint-Domingue, 35,000 French settlers were given lands in Cuba. By the beginning of the 17th century, some 20% of the total male population of Catalonia was made up of French immigrants. In the 18th century and early 19th century, a small migration of French emigrated by official invitation of the Habsburgs to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, now the nations of Austria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, Serbia and Romania, some of them coming from French-speaking communes in Lorraine or being French-Swiss Walters from the Valais canton in Switzerland, maintained for some generations the French language and a specific ethnic identity, later labeled as Banat. By 1788 there were 8 villages populated by French colonists. French Republic. The French First Republic appeared following the 1789 French Revolution. It replaced the ancient Kingdom of France, ruled by the divine right of kings. Hobsbawm highlighted the role of conscription, invented by Napoleon, and of the 1880s public instruction laws, which allowed mixing of the various groups of France into a nationalist mold which created the French citizen and his consciousness of membership to a common nation, while the various regional languages of France were progressively eradicated. The 1870 Franco-Prussian War, which led to the short-lived Paris Commune of 1871, was instrumental in bolstering patriotic feelings. Until World War I, French politicians never completely lost sight of the disputed Alsace-Lorraine region, which played a major role in the definition of the French nation and therefore of the French people. The decrees of 24 October 1870 by Adolphe Crémieux granted automatic and massive French citizenship to all Jewish people of Algeria. 20th century. Successive waves of immigrants during the 19th and 20th centuries were rapidly assimilated into French culture. France's population dynamics began to change in the middle of the 19th century, as France joined the Industrial Revolution. The pace of industrial growth attracted millions of European immigrants over the next century, with especially large numbers arriving from Poland, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, and Spain. In the period from 1915 to 1950, many immigrants came from Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Russia, Scandinavia and Yugoslavia. Small but significant numbers of Frenchmen in the north and northeast regions have relatives in Germany and Great Britain. Between 1956 and 1967, about 235,000 North African Jews from Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco also immigrated to France due to the decline of the French Empire and following the Six-Day War. Hence, by 1968, Jews of North African origin comprised the majority of the Jewish population of France. As these new immigrants were already culturally French, they needed little time to adjust to French society. French law made it easy for thousands of settlers, national French from former colonies of North and East Africa, India and Indochina, to live in mainland France. It is estimated that 20,000 settlers were living in Saigon in 1945, and there were 68,430 European settlers living in Madagascar in 1958. 1.6 million European Pieds Noirs settlers migrated from Algeria, Tunisia and Morocco. In just a few months in 1962, 900,000 Pieds Noirs settlers left Algeria, in the most massive relocation of population in Europe since the World War II. In the 1970s, over 30,000 French settlers left Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge regime as the Pol Pot government confiscated their farms and land properties. In the 1960s, a second wave of immigration came to France, which was needed for reconstruction purposes and for cheaper labor after the devastation brought on by World War II. French entrepreneurs went to Maghreb countries looking for cheap labor, thus encouraging work immigration to France. Their settlement was officialized with Jacques Chirac's Family Regrouping Act of 1976. Since then, immigration has become more varied, although France stopped being a major immigration country compared to other European countries. The large impact of North African and Arab immigration is the greatest and has brought racial, socio-cultural and religious questions to a country seen as homogeneously European, French and Christian for thousands of years. Nevertheless, according to Justin Vaser, professor at Sciences Po Paris, integration of Muslim immigrants is happening as part of a background evolution, and recent studies confirmed the results of their assimilation, showing that North Africans seem to be characterized by a high degree of cultural integration reflected in a relatively high propensity to exogamy, with rates ranging from 20% to 50%. According to Emmanuel Todd, the relatively high exogamy among French Algerians can be explained by the colonial link between France and Algeria. A small French descent group also subsequently arrived from Latin America in the 1970s. Languages. In France, most French people speak the French language as their mother tongue, but certain languages like Norman, Occitan, Corsican, Euskara, French, Flemish and Breton remain spoken in certain regions. There have also been periods of history when a majority of French people had other first languages. Today, many immigrants speak another tongue at home. According to historian Eric Hobsbawm, the French language has been essential to the concept of France, although in 1789, 50% of the French people did not speak it at all, and only 12 to 13% spoke it fairly well, even in oil language zones. It was not usually used except in cities, and even then not always in the outlying districts. Abroad, the French language is spoken in many different countries, in particular the former French colonies. Nevertheless, speaking French is distinct from being a French citizen. Thus, Francophony, or the speaking of French, must not be confused with French citizenship or ethnicity. For example, French speakers in Switzerland are not French citizens. Native English-speaking blacks on the island of Saint Martin hold French nationality even though they do not speak French as a first language, while their neighboring French-speaking Haitian immigrants speak French Creole yet remain foreigners. Large numbers of people of French ancestry outside Europe speak other first languages, particularly English, throughout most of North America, Spanish or Portuguese in southern South America, and Afrikaans in South Africa. The adjective French can be used to mean either French citizen or French speaker, and usage varies depending on the context, with the former being common in France. The latter meaning is often used in Canada, when discussing matters internal to Canada.